Picture this. The Roman army wasn't just a military force. It was a machine of conquest unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Individual soldiers were melted down, stripped of their humanity, and forged into a collective weapon of terrifying efficiency. But that steel of discipline, it was born from incomprehensible cruelty. Roman soldiers didn't fear barbarian hordes or enemy spears half as much as they feared the judgment of their own commanders. Because Rome had developed a form of military justice so terrifying, so psychologically devastating, that the mere threat of it could keep entire legions in line. They called it decimatio, decimation, and it was exactly what it sounds like. The word comes from the Latin for 10, and it meant a systematic reduction of the ranks by a very specific percentage. But here's what made it uniquely horrifying. This wasn't punishment for individual crimes. This was punishment for collective failure. If a cohort broke in battle, if they fled when they should have stood, if they mutinied against their commanders, the entire unit faced decimation. Because in the Roman military philosophy, the group was everything and the individual was nothing. You weren't a man with a name and a family back home. You were a cog in the machine, and if that machine malfunctioned, the entire section got scrapped. The purpose was simple: ensure the absolute obedience of the legions through blood and terror. And it worked. Oh, it worked brilliantly. The ritual of decimation began on the parade ground in the morning, during what the Romans called the lustratio. The entire legion would be assembled in formation. We're talking thousands of men standing in perfect silence, watching. The disgraced cohort would be marched to the center without their belts or weapons. Now you might think that sounds minor, but the military belt, the cingulum, was everything to a Roman soldier. It held your sword, it marked your status as a warrior. Having it stripped from you in front of the entire legion was a profound humiliation. You were no longer a soldier, you were less than a slave. You were livestock waiting for slaughter. The commander would step forward and read the list of crimes against Rome. Maybe your unit had retreated without orders. Maybe you'd shown cowardice in the face of the enemy. Maybe you'd hesitated when you should have charged. It didn't matter if you personally had fought like a hero. It didn't matter if you'd killed 10 enemies while your coward tentmate ran. The unit was judged as a single organism, and if that organism had failed, every cell in it would pay the price. But here's where it gets truly nightmarish. The terror of decimation lay in its absolute randomness, its complete indifference to guilt or innocence. A helmet would be brought forward, or sometimes a bronze urn filled with tokens. The cohort would be divided into groups of 10 men, and these weren't random groupings. These were your tent mates, your contubernales, the men you'd lived with in the closest quarters imaginable. These were the deepest bonds of brotherhood the ancient world knew. And now you were going to draw lots to see who among you would die, so the other 9 could live. White stone meant life. Black stone meant death. Just imagine that moment. Your hand reaching into that helmet, fingers closing around a smooth stone, not knowing if you're holding your survival or your execution. The psychological torture of that moment was stretched into an eternity. Men wept. Men prayed to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. And then, one by one, they would open their hands and reveal their fate. But here's the truly diabolical brilliance of this punishment. The survivors didn't just get to walk away, they became the killers. The 9 men who drew white stones would be handed clubs and stones by the centurions. And then they would be ordered to form a circle around their friend, their brother, the man who drew the black stone. This was called fustuarium, and it was one of the most brutal and intimate methods of execution ever devised. There was no clean sword stroke through the heart, no quick death by spear. The condemned man would be bludgeoned to death by the very brothers who had shared his meals the night before, who had bandaged his wounds, who had stood beside him in the shield wall. The sound of those clubs striking flesh, of bones breaking, of a man screaming for mercy from the people he loved most in the world, that sound was the lesson. That visceral, horrible sound was what taught every watching legionary that obedience to the eagle was the only path to survival. The psychological impact on the survivors was exactly what Rome wanted. This was calculated destruction of their previous identities. They had washed their hands in their brother's blood, and they would be forever bound by that trauma. Historical records show that decimated units almost never retreated again. They fought with a desperation that bordered on insanity because they feared their general more than they feared any enemy or any god. This wasn't just punishment. This was conditioning that bypassed logic entirely and wired fear directly into the nervous system. You were alive only because you drew a lucky stone, and your hands were the instruments of your brother's murder. Let me give you a historical example that shows just how casually Roman commanders would deploy this nuclear option. The year is 71 BCE. Rome is fighting a war against Spartacus and his army of escaped slaves. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest and most ambitious men in Rome, is commanding the legions. But his soldiers have shown cowardice. They've hesitated. They've let slaves push them back. This is unacceptable, so Crassus orders the decimation of the first cohorts that fled. 500 men were clubbed to death in a single afternoon, while the rest of the army watched in absolute horror. And you know what? The army immediately became more effective, more ruthless, because now every soldier understood that defeat was worse than death. Retreating was worse than dying, because at least if you died fighting, you died with honor. If you ran and survived, you might face something far worse. But the punishment didn't end when the corpses were dragged away. The survivors of decimation were treated like pariahs, like ghosts haunting the legion. They were banished from within the camp walls and forced to sleep in the open like beasts. Their wheat rations, the standard food of a Roman soldier, were replaced with barley. Now barley was what you fed to livestock. This was a daily dietary humiliation, a constant reminder that they were no longer considered men of Rome. Every meal was shame. Every night sleeping outside the protective wall, exposed to the elements and potential enemy raids, was a reminder that the legion no longer cared whether they lived or died. They were dead men walking who had to purchase their lives back with enemy blood. Many decimated units would actually request the most dangerous assignments. They would volunteer to charge into suicidal odds, to assault fortified positions, to take on missions that had no reasonable chance of success. Because death by the enemy's sword was preferable to living under their commander's scorn. That's the level of psychological control Rome had achieved. Now, let's talk about the fundamental difference between Roman morality and our modern ethics, because this is crucial to understanding why decimation made sense to them. In our world, we believe in individual responsibility. We believe in fair trials, in proving guilt, in punishing the specific person who committed the crime. To the Romans, that was nonsense. The legion was the sacred entity. The individual was infinitely replaceable. If a limb gets gangrene, you cut it off to save the body. It doesn't matter if some parts of that limb are still healthy. You remove it all. Individual innocence was completely irrelevant to the greater purpose. This was utilitarian calculus written in blood and enforced with iron. Mark Antony used decimation during his disastrous Parthian campaign, forcing his ranks to purge themselves rather than allow a total rout. Augustus Caesar, who we often think of as this benevolent emperor who brought peace to Rome, also employed decimation to quell mutinies during the civil wars. Even the good emperors understood that this tool had its place in the arsenal of command. But decimation was a double-edged sword. It could destroy the very morale it was supposed to save. This was a nuclear option, and it was only used by commanders who were either supremely confident or utterly desperate. Because here's the thing, killing 10% of your force is a massive waste of valuable manpower. Each Roman legionary represented years of training, significant investment from the state, equipment, experience. These weren't conscripts you could easily replace. So when a general ordered decimation, it was often a sign that he'd lost control, that the situation had deteriorated to the point where normal discipline had completely broken down. As the centuries passed and the composition of the Roman army changed, as more auxiliary troops and foreign mercenaries joined the ranks, decimation became less common. These weren't men raised on Roman values who would accept such archaic brutality. The decline of decimation actually mirrored the slow decline of that rigid, uncompromising discipline that had built the empire in the first place. But for nearly 1,000 years, the shadow of the fustuarium hung over Roman military life. It was the ultimate expression of the state's power over the citizen's life. Your life belonged to Rome, and Rome could spend it however it wished. The brutality of decimation bound the survivors together in a pact of silence and fear. The memory of what they'd done was carried like a scar on their souls. It created a hardness in the Roman character that allowed them to conquer without mercy, to rule without compassion. There are accounts of soldiers committing suicide rather than face the disgrace of the barley ration, rather than live as a marked man within the legion. The social stigma was sometimes more lethal than the executioner's clubs, because to be Roman was to have honor, and to lose that honor was to lose everything that made life worth living. So when we look at the glory of Rome, when we see those marble statues of proud legionaries and those golden eagles held high, we also need to see the white stones and the black stones. We need to see the blood on the parade ground. We need to understand that the legendary discipline of Rome wasn't just about superior training or better tactics. It was about creating a system where the consequences of failure were worse than anything you could face in battle. The Roman soldier marched forward not just because he was brave, but because the path backward was paved with the bodies of his friends who drew the wrong stone. Decimation stands as a testament to the terrifying potential of human organization, to what men are capable of doing to each other in the name of order and duty. The Roman Empire wasn't just built on the backs of its enemies. It was cemented with the blood of its own sons. The next time you hear about Roman military might, about legions that conquered the known world, remember that their power came with a price. And that price was paid not by enemies on distant battlefields, but by soldiers standing in formation, drawing stones from a helmet, knowing that their brothers were about to kill them, or that they were about to become killers themselves. The silence after a decimation was heavier than the silence of the grave. There were no songs sung around the fires that night, no dice thrown, no jokes shared, just the knowledge that the beast of Rome had been fed and was still watching, always watching, waiting for the next failure, the next show of weakness. And in that silence, an empire was forged that would dominate the world for centuries, built not just on courage and strategy, but on terror so profound that men would rather die charging into impossible odds than face the judgment of their own commanders. That was the true face of Roman discipline. That was decimation.